What's going on, guys? Andrew of Newbar Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking some about Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 79. Now, this episode continues the trend that we've had for these past several episodes about focusing around Blood Sheppard. On the whole, I think this is a pretty decent idea on the writer's parts. It gives us a chance to step back, focus on one of our side characters, hone in on a little bit of their backstory and whatnot, and I think Blood Sheppard has come out to be pretty well-rounded between his tie-ins to Emma, his somewhat, anti-hero type of perspective on the whole thing, and the fact that he doesn't like AIs, doesn't trust them, but he's not necessarily working against what's supposed to be our main protagonist party in Yusaku and Soulburner and now Blue Maiden and that whole gang there. Add on to the fact that he does have, a bit of a tragic past, and he's got these goals, and he has that lone wolf mentality, and I think it just adds some nice diversity to the cast, and adds something that we haven't had before, in addition to, once more, I'm always one who appreciates it when they take the time to put some effort into these side characters. Now, unfortunately, the way this episode ends up playing out, it's seeming like it may be one of Blood Sheppard's last that we see him for a while, but we'll get to that in a couple minutes. This episode opens up with a little bit of a glimpse into Lightning's palace. Now, this is something we've had a glimpse of before when he's had, brief interactions of dialogue with Bowman, or just when Bowman was first appearing, those types of things, but never a real in-depth look as to what's going on there, what exactly it is Lightning's up to. Here we get a peek into the fact that he's essentially watching monitors, virtual monitors he's creating, to be able to watch all the duels going on with Link Vrains. We also are reminded of how good of a hacker Revolver is, and that he's essentially covering up the tracks of every single one of his duels. Leads me to question, is Playmaker being so cautious as to do this? There's definitely no reference as to that happening on screen. Then again, they didn't reference it with Revolver either, so maybe he is, maybe he isn't. If Playmaker isn't necessarily covering up his duels, though, given the amount Bowman was able to learn just from Bowman's duels with Playmaker, if Playmaker has any further duels in the meantime, which they're heavily hinting at him having a rematch with, say, Go Onizuka, that would scare me for Playmaker's odds a little bit, other than main protagonist shielding, of course, that basically protects him from ever losing, but still, because that would give all the more opportunity for someone like Lightning, like Bowman, to study Playmaker, and once more, Bowman's already shown how adaptable, how good he is at learning from every single one of his matches with Playmaker. Suddenly, if you're adding in every other duel Playmaker's ever had that Lightning can monitor for him, and every duel he's going to have between now and the next time he faces Bowman and Lightning, and, the possibilities are essentially endless for Bowman's potential as a duelist. Could be a little bit of a scary thought there. I think Revolver's doing a nice job covering his tracks, and of course, knowing Revolver and the fact that he does seem to be conscious of the fact that, okay, I'm going to need to work alongside Playmaker, it's very possible Revolver's covering that up for him. The impression I'm getting from the writers so far is that Revolver is the strongest of the human hackers that we've encountered so far. After all, his father was very involved in the development of, these Ignises, knew Link Vrains inside and out, and so I'd find it hard to believe that Revolver hasn't picked up the majority of that knowledge himself, and his actions would back that up rather well. Now, in terms of what we pick up in terms of what's going on inside of this palace, other than just the monitors and such, we are reminded of how sad of a state Jin is. His consciousness data has essentially been erased by lightning. We find Windy within a pond. Sort of reminds me a little bit of the Lazarus Pit, for those of you that are familiar with the DC universe, not necessarily the cinematic universe, but more like the comics, or even the CW shows, which are the ones I'm more familiar with, or even the Christopher Nolan, I'm sorry, not referencing the Christopher Nolan movies. I meant to say the Batman Arkham games. There's some loose reference to it in there, here and there. Essentially what it is if you're extremely injured or dying from old age or sickness or whatever, you can dunk yourself in there, and then depending on the version, there's different side effects, but usually in some way, shape, or form, it takes a piece of you with it. A lot of times this influences your soul, kind of takes pieces of that, and your humanity, your sense of moral code gets grayer and grayer with time, or something along those lines. Once more, strongly depends on the version, but regardless, this reminds me a little bit of that, and that Lightning's essentially got Windy chilling in this pond. He's getting a lot better. He looks a lot more healed up than the last time we saw him, where basically a third to two-thirds of his face were completely gone. His body was mostly erased, and he was kind of melting into goop. Here he's got a complete body, but he looks rather mummified, crustified, those types of things, and we see Windy absolutely raging at this fact. I mean, and who wouldn't? He's essentially was already bent against the humans to begin with, and them having left him in this state, in a state where Lightning's even informing him he's beyond repair, he's extremely frustrated. So definitely no signs of Windy being one to change sides. Not that I thought that was very probable in the first place, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Does have a tendency to go that route where we watch an antagonist change sides. Now, Lightning, in this last little glimpse from this scene here, talks about turning his palace into a grave. His plan is to lure Blood Sheppard into there, and it essentially works. Now, before we we jump into how that works and the duel happens, we do get a really nice scene here between Emma and Blood Sheppard where they meet at the father's grave. Emma's acknowledging the fact that even with Yusaku, with Soulburner, with Blue Maiden, and herself all working on the case, none of them are having any luck finding anything going on with Lightning or even where he is. And Revolver, whether they're completely aware of this or not, I have a feeling Playmaker's probably somewhat aware that Revolver is not having much luck given how they seem to communicate when there are major details of importance going on, and we haven't seen them communicate for a while. Revolver's not having much luck either, so Emma decides to then go to her brother, see if she can't go to visit her father's grave. Maybe she suspects her brother's there. That would be my bet, given how we can assume, based on the timeline, it was maybe a day or two ago at most that Emma and her brother had the duel where she revealed that their father actually did care about Blood Sheppard. So they happen to encounter both dropping off roses. Blood Sheppard insists that he's essentially just kissing his father goodbye one last time, not really in a loving way, but more of he's breaking up with him and he's done with their whole relationship despite what Emma told him. But Emma reaches out to him. Blood Sheppard insists once more that he got this lone wolf type of a mentality, very similar to what he did with Revolver, but based on how blunt and shortcut he was, part of me really wants to believe that Emma was partially beginning to get through to him. He definitely seemed to have a reaction in the last time that they dueled to the fact that his father did seem to care about him. So I think if Blood Sheppard manages to come out alive from this face-off with Lightning, there's a chance he may end up eventually switching to side with Emma, even if it is on somewhat shaky ground, because since he would likely want all of the Ignises destroyed, whereas Emma doesn't, still, I could see that change of coat starting to unravel here. Regardless, it was a nice exchange to see in between the two of them. It shows that I think those walls between them are gradually breaking down, the fact that Emma was even willing to reach out to him, and the fact that he didn't necessarily respond in an aggressive manner to her. He was more so just flustered once more with the father's relationship and him being brought up, rather than Emma. The stakes for this duel are immediately set very high, and that Lightning essentially says, alright, you lose, I'm erasing you from existence. You're just a shell like my buddy Jin here. I'm getting rid of your consciousness data, and all is good, said and done. But if you win, you get to basically do what you want with me, so you want to go? I mean, I don't think Lightning would necessarily live up to his word here. I don't know how much I trust him given the power he has over Link Vrains. All the other Ignises have acknowledged the fact that this guy has far more influence over the data material than they do, so whether he'd actually live up to the fact that Blood Sheppard can then do as he pleases with him or not, hard to say. Now, the other thing that informs us that this is probably a really relevant duel, probably kind of the turning point in sparking that final conflict, given the trends that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a tendency to face, in that when you watch a major character fall, that's usually when everything starts to really start rolling in terms of the major conflict of the season. It's writing like Blood Sheppard's probably going to lose here. We've got all of the characters converge to see this happen. Perfect time for a catalyst once more. We've got Playmaker in there. We've got Revolver. We've got Spectre, Soulburner, Blue Maiden, Ghost Girl. Kusanagi's watching from his computer monitor. The only people we don't know if they're watching or not are Soul Technologies. I'm under the impression they probably aren't, but they're kind of this third gray area faction in the mist, so I don't think they necessarily need to see this for it to be the catalyst that really starts to get the ball rolling in terms of the tension building, and then finally coming to its head here pretty soon. Now, that being said, the other thing that adds to the level of intensity here is Blood Sheppard may actually die. I mean, let's look at this duel for a second. He's facing Lightning, who is essentially our main antagonist right now. We can't have him just generically lose to Blood Sheppard unless they're going to do something really creative, like have Lightning lose and then, you know, Bowman goes on some revenge streak and turns in and basically takes down everybody except for Playmaker, and then it comes to a final duel there. Could be a nice twist on the typical Yu-Gi-Oh! Formula, but I have a feeling it's going to have to be one of our main characters, i.e. probably Revolver or Playmaker, that ends up taking down Lightning. We'll have to see how that plays out, of course, and I would like to see something different be done from time to time, but at the same time, their classic formula is tried and true, which is just to leave the main antagonist to the rival or hero themselves. Sort of plays out a little bit the way I remember Mai and Merrick dueling. Mai was well aware of Merrick's main strategy being to summon the Winged Dragon of Ra when they dueled in the Battle City arc of Duel Monsters, right? So she uses cards to be able to steal the Winged Dragon of Ra and essentially use it against him. Now that ends up backfiring on her. Moving back to the duel between our good old Blood Sheppard and Lightning here. Blood Sheppard's well aware of the main strategy Lightning's going to use revolves around the Link Arrows spell, so he plays a trap to counter that spell, essentially use it against him once more by blowing up the spell. He'll destroy all the monsters linked to it, and therefore it would have left Windy with essentially a blank field. Windy manages to counter that. Merrick manages to counter the other thing. It reminds me of that pretty well here, and once more, if we're following Yu-Gi-Oh patterns and it's following the one thing it already reminds me of, Mai put up a pretty good fight, but she ended up losing to Merrick. Blood Sheppard's probably going to put up a pretty good fight and end up losing. Even the episode preview is hinting in that it's talking about how he summons the ultimate drone and how he's got the duel in control, but ... Lightning wins, and just most likely the case here. Once more, we can't have our final antagonist go down just to like some character that we've been putting focus on just for these past few episodes. Now, Lightning also points out that he considers Blood Sheppard his weakest enemy. This is a little bit insulting and just a little bit of a character trait that I want to point out about Lightning. He's very calculated, he's very analytical, and he seems to be paying close attention to what's going on here. Blood Sheppard is that lone wolf. Lightning wouldn't have necessarily seen anything that would directly state that, right? But at the same time, he's aware of it. Why? That's what makes him his weakest ally, at least from if I were Lightning, that would be the way I would see it, because if you take down Blood Sheppard, he's not directly tied to anybody. It's not necessarily going to force you to face multiple people at once. For example, Yusaku and company and Revolver and company both show up to this duel, but it's after it's already started, so they can't necessarily join in and interrupt. You know, if it would have been Yusaku, if it would have been Soulburner, if it would have been Blue Maiden, if it would have been Revolver. Revolver's at least got Spectre. Yusaku's got his other two companions to back him up. It would have been a much larger conflict, versus if you use Lightning's, who even points out the fact that he's lower on numbers, if you use his tactics, pick them off one by one. Bring those numbers games to be nice and even before you face this final conflict. He's showing to be a very calculated main antagonist. That's something I usually enjoy in a main villain. I don't like when it's just, they're so powerful they can just randomly truck through things without needing to give it any thought. Lightning is powerful. He's showing that in his duel. He manages to do a chain series of Link summons, plan out his board so that Link Arrows is used to its maximum capability, and even counter the trap that he was unaware Blood Sheppard necessarily has to wipe out his entire board using Link Arrows against him. And he's still going. So he's a good duelist, but he didn't OTK him or anything like that either. So a lot of it comes down to his ability to be a strategist as well. Adding on to Lightning, another neat little detail I noticed about him is his deck are called these Armados cards, right? And they're essentially based off ancient Greek and or Roman military figures. He's got the statues, and then he's got the like humanoid types of forms of them as well. You know, the statues being his normal monsters, and then the humanoid types being the Link monsters, at least from what we've seen here. Interestingly enough, the opponent he's facing, Blood Sheppard, is using machines. His entire deck is based around drones, right? Well, then look at the people who are piloting those decks. Lightning is essentially a futuristic form of technology. He's a fully independent, free-thinking AI, yet he's using a deck full of monsters that are ancient, based in much older tech, and based around humans. Whereas then you take a look at Blood Sheppard. He's the human in this duel, and theoretically the quote-unquote more primitive form, in that he's a natural being, right? He's not necessarily like this newer creation, I guess is what I'm getting at here, this newer form of existence the way the Ignises are, yet he's the one using the newer technology and the drones that are piloted by AIs. So it almost seems to me like the decks should be swapped here based on their characters. Just a neat little detail I wanted to point out there. Now, another point that Lightning makes to Blood Sheppard is about how humans have this sort of superiority complex and that they are always viewing themselves at the top of the food chain. Another thing where Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of subtly poking at some of the philosophies that exist within our society. To get an idea of what I mean, nobody really thinks twice at the idea that millions of chickens are killed each year in order to feed the population with chicken, right? Or not nobody, but the large majority of the population doesn't necessarily think twice about it. Now, we do have a growing population of vegetarians and vegans, and I'm not necessarily going to voice my opinion one way or another of that. You live your life the way you want to live it, but the point is, the societally accepted standard is human life is valued more than the life of other creatures, and humans see themselves as being able to essentially use nature as their tool to survive. Hence why we're like, a lot of the things with the environmental issues are going on right now could be blamed as a result of that mindset. Once more, you live your life the way you want to live it. I'm not necessarily trying to criticize one way or another, but that mindset does exist to at least some extent within our society, and Lightning identifies this, and he's like, well, that's what's causing the root of our conflict anyway, is we theoretically could be above humans, but you are not trained to be able to accept that, so we've got to move on. basically humans aren't able to accept a different alpha is his point, and that's creating this conflict. I always like it when Yu-Gi-Oh kind of pokes at these little philosophical ideas, and I think they did a good job with it here. So with all that being said, guys, I thought this was a pretty good episode on the whole. I think we are doomed to watching Blood Sheppard lose, unlike some of the previous duels we've had, particularly like Blood Sheppard versus Emma, where I thought it was a toss-up. This one I think is already written out for us. Once more, Lightning's our main antagonist. He's probably going to end up doing Playmaker and quite probably Revolver as well. Be sure to let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome. And I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains content.